I poured my heart into saving that company. I led a massive restructure, turned everything around, and they fired me for it. They said I moved too fast, too bold, but they had no idea what they were about to unleash. This is the story of how I went from being betrayed and thrown away to building something so much bigger, stronger, and more powerful than they could ever imagine. Now, I'm going to show them what happens when you make the biggest mistake of your life by underestimating me. When I first walked into the conference room that Monday morning, I could sense something was off. The usual hum of murmured conversations, the faint tapping of laptops, and the morning buzz of my team was eerily absent. Instead, there was an air of anticipation, like everyone knew something I didn't. The chairs were arranged differently, and the coffee pot was already brewing, which was unusual because I usually took the first cup of the day. As I sat at the head of the table, I couldn't help but feel a pang of unease. This was supposed to be another typical board meeting, but the atmosphere felt heavy, suffocating almost. I glanced at the faces around the room: my CFO, the head of marketing, HR, and of course the CEO, Greg. But Greg was unusually silent today, his usually loud and commanding presence dulled. "All right, let's get started," I said, trying to shake off the anxiety gnawing at my gut. "As you all know, we've been working on the restructuring plan for the past few months. Today we're going to review the final draft and—" Before I could finish, Greg cut in. "Actually, we need to talk about something else first." I froze. His tone was all business, and the coldness in his voice sent a ripple through the room. The entire group shifted uneasily in their seats. "Greg, what's going on?" I asked, my voice not quite hiding the tension I felt. "Let's just say it's time for a change," he replied curtly, his eyes narrowing. The silence in the room grew heavier, and I could feel the sudden weight of every set of eyes locked on me. The tension in the room was palpable. My mind raced. What did he mean by a change? This wasn't like him. Greg had always been a man of action, quick to offer a solution, a plan, a directive. But today he was distant, almost detached. I cleared my throat and continued. "If this is about the restructuring, I'm confident we're on track." No, Greg interrupted again, his voice firm now. "This is about you, John." I felt a chill run through my spine. A cold sweat started forming on the back of my neck, but I kept my composure. My gaze flickered to the others in the room, but no one would meet my eyes. It was like they were all in on something I wasn't. "Me? What are you talking about, Greg?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, even though my heart was pounding in my chest. Greg leaned back in his chair, folding his arms, his gaze hard. "Effective immediately. We are letting you go. Your services are no longer needed." The words hung in the air like a toxic gas, slowly poisoning everything around me. I sat there, stunned, unable to process what I had just heard. For a moment, everything around me felt like a distant blur. The voices in the room became muffled, and I could only hear the thudding of my own pulse in my ears. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to retaliate. But I stayed still, forcing myself to remain composed. "You're firing me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Greg nodded. "We're moving in a different direction. The board has decided that a new leadership team is needed for the next phase of the company." I glanced around the table again. This wasn't happening. The board, my board, the people who had supported my vision, my ideas, couldn't possibly have approved this. They couldn't have. I turned to the others at the table, searching their faces for any sign of support. But no one said anything. No one even made eye contact. Everyone sat there, silent, like they were waiting for me to say something. I felt a knot form in my stomach as the realization hit me. The people I trusted, the people I had built this company with, had turned on me. And worse, they had done it behind my back. I glanced at Greg, my once ally, now my executioner. "This is a joke, right?" I asked, though I knew the answer already. He shook his head slowly. "No joke, John. It's time for you to go." The room was still. A dead silence followed, broken only by the sound of my own breathing. But even in that moment, a part of me refused to believe it. I had led them through one of the biggest restructurings in company history. I had been the one who kept the company afloat during the roughest times, making the hard decisions when no one else could. And now they were throwing me out. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor, and forced myself to hold my head high. If you think I'm just going to walk away without a fight, Greg, you're gravely mistaken. With that, I turned and left the room, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the tense silence. I had just been fired, but I wasn't finished yet. The walk back to my office was a blur. Every step felt heavier than the last. I knew that what had just happened was more than just a simple firing. It was a calculated move. Greg and the board had orchestrated this in a way that left no room for discussion, no chance for me to defend myself. They had decided that I was no longer useful, and now I was just an obstacle to their plans. I opened the door to my office, closed it quietly behind me, and sank into my chair. For a moment I just sat there, staring at the same desk where I had crafted countless strategies, restructured divisions, and made life-changing decisions for this company. How had I gone from the hero to the villain in such a short time? I grabbed my phone and scrolled through the messages that had already started flooding in. Some were from colleagues who had heard the news, surprised, confused, offering condolences. Others were from clients and partners, expressing disbelief and asking if there was anything they could do. But there was nothing they could do. As I stared at the messages, one in particular caught my eye. It was from Caroline, the head of HR, who had been a constant ally throughout my tenure. Her message was short, but it carried weight. The board isn't happy with how you handled things, John. They think you moved too quickly, too aggressively, but I'm sorry, it's done. I ran my fingers through my hair, letting out a deep breath. They thought I moved too quickly. I had taken over a company that was struggling, in danger of being left behind by its competitors. I had pushed for a restructuring that streamlined operations, cut the fat, and prepared us for the future. But apparently my methods were too aggressive for the delicate sensibilities of the board. I glanced at my reflection in the window, catching the sharp edge of my own gaze. I knew what I had done. I had made the hard calls, the ones that others were too afraid to make. And it worked. The company had been profitable. Morale was up. We had increased market share. But apparently none of that mattered now. I stood up from my desk and walked over to the window, trying to focus on anything outside that could distract me from the turmoil inside. But all I saw was a sea of buildings, towering glass giants that reflected the growing storm inside me. How could they do this? How could they take everything I built, everything I fought for, and throw it away? But deep down, I knew the answer. It wasn't about me. It never had been. This was about power. This was about control. The board, Greg, they were in it for themselves, looking out for their own interests. They didn't care about the people who had made sacrifices, who had worked tirelessly to keep the wheels turning. I let out a bitter laugh, but it didn't feel like laughter. It felt like a hollow, empty sound. But there was something else brewing underneath that anger. A spark, a feeling that I hadn't had the luxury of focusing on in all the chaos. It was the spark of opportunity. I had been working tirelessly for this company, but now I was free. Free from the politics, free from the constant push and pull of corporate agendas. The idea began to take root in my mind. What if I could do it again? What if I could build something new, something better, something that would challenge the corporate structures that had just discarded me? The fire in my chest began to grow. I didn't just want to leave this place, I wanted to burn it all down. I grabbed my phone again, scrolling through contacts until I found the one I was looking for. Adam. He had been a close friend and former colleague, and more importantly, he had the kind of financial backing that could help me launch my next move. Adam, I typed quickly, I need to talk to you. I've just been let go. I have an idea that could change everything. Call me. I hit send and leaned back in my chair. For the first time in hours, I felt a sense of control return to my body. I was done being the puppet. I wasn't going to sit back and let Greg and the board dictate my future. This wasn't the end, it was the beginning of something bigger. It wasn't long before my phone rang, breaking the silence of my office. The caller ID read Adam, and I answered before the first ring could finish. John, I heard the news. What happened? His voice was calm but laced with concern. Adam had been through the ups and downs of corporate life with me, and I could tell he was both shocked and, maybe, a little worried. It's over, Adam, I said, keeping my voice level. I've been let go. The board didn't like the direction I was taking. They think the restructuring was too fast, too aggressive. That's insane, he replied, his voice tightening. From what I've heard, the company was thriving. You did exactly what they hired you to do. Exactly, I said, pacing back and forth. I didn't leave any room for excuses. I pushed them to act quickly, streamline and modernize, but they got scared. And now they're taking it all back. They want a softer touch, a slower pace. Adam sighed. So what's your plan now? You can't just let them get away with this, John. And that's when it hit me. No, I can't, I said, my mind racing, but I have an idea. I'm not done. I've got the skills, the vision, and now the freedom to do it all over again. But this time it's going to be on my terms. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, then Adam's voice came through, thoughtful and slow. You're talking about starting something new? Exactly, I replied. I've been in the corporate machine long enough to know how it works. But I've also seen the cracks, the places where it breaks down. I can do this differently. I can build something that's more agile, more adaptive, something that challenges the norms. Are you thinking about a new company entirely, or taking a different approach with the board members you already know? I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. It's not about using the same people or the same systems. This is bigger than that. I want to build a company that doesn't have to answer to the traditional corporate structure. I want to create a place where the people at the top are in it for more than just profit. They're in it for the mission. A place where leadership can make bold moves without worrying about whether they'll offend the wrong people. A company that doesn't take no for an answer. There was another long pause. Adam was always cautious, thoughtful in his responses. I could almost hear the wheels turning in his head as he processed my words. Finally he spoke, his voice steady but tinged with excitement. John, you're onto something. You've got the vision, the experience, and the guts to pull it off. I've always said you were built for this, but I never thought it would come like this. But you're not going to be alone, right? You'll need help. I smiled, feeling the adrenaline start to surge again. That's where you come in. I'm not doing this alone, Adam. You and I, together. We've always known how to get things done. I need your expertise. I need your network. I need someone who isn't afraid to take risks. There was a brief silence before Adam spoke again, this time with a sense of determination in his voice. All right, let's do it. Let's make it happen. I'm in. But I'll need some specifics. What's the first step? First step, I said, feeling a spark of excitement. The first step is to start thinking big. We're going to go after the biggest players in the industry and show them we're here to disrupt. I'm talking partnerships, alliances, and market penetration. We need to scale quickly and build a team that believes in the vision as much as we do. I could feel Adam's energy on the other end of the line. He was with me now. And what about funding? He asked. You're going to need capital, especially if you want to move fast. I nodded. I've already got some ideas. I'll reach out to a few venture capitalists I know. We'll pitch them our vision, and I know they'll be interested. There's a lot of capital out there looking for the next big thing, and I'm going to make sure we're at the top of their list. We spent the next hour fleshing out the details, what the new company would look like, how we'd approach potential clients, the key hires we'd need, and how we'd structure the team. It was a whirlwind of ideas, a rush of creative energy that felt like a floodgate opening after years of being closed. As I hung up the phone with Adam, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. For the first time in months, the weight of corporate politics, the endless meetings, the faceless board members, all of it felt distant. Now I was focused on something new, something real. I didn't know where it would go yet, or how long it would take. But one thing was certain, I wasn't done. The fire had been reignited, and this time there would be no looking back. It was clear that the plan I had in mind needed to be something radical. I wasn't interested in replicating the same corporate nonsense I had just escaped. If I wanted to truly disrupt the industry, I needed to think differently. The game had changed, and I had to be ahead of it. I spent the following weeks laying the groundwork, putting together the business plan, and refining the vision. But this time, I wasn't just planning for another company, I was planning for a movement. First, I reached out to a few former colleagues I knew I could trust. I wasn't looking for yes men or sycophants. I needed people who weren't afraid to speak their minds, challenge the status quo, and get things done without needing constant approval from higher-ups. People who could match my ambition. Caroline from HR was the first person I called. I knew she had the sharp eye for talent and the know-how to build a solid company culture. I need someone who understands the human side of business, I told her. Someone who can help me create a team that isn't just working for a paycheck, but for a mission. Can I count on you? Absolutely, she replied without hesitation, but we're going to need more than just culture. If we want to build something that lasts, we need the right structure, something that will scale. I could hear the excitement in her voice, and I knew this was the start of something big. I agree. It's not just about the product, it's about the people. We'll get the right structure in place, but the foundation needs to be built on trust, collaboration, and innovation. Next, I turned to Adam, who had already lined up some capital for us to start pitching to venture capitalists. We sat down and began working on the pitch deck, laying out everything from the mission statement to the financial projections. It wasn't just about what we were going to do, it was about how we were going to do it differently. Traditional companies get bogged down by bureaucracy, I told Adam, going over the presentation. We're going to move fast, we're going to make decisions quickly and empower our team to act autonomously. We're going to be lean, flexible, and agile, able to pivot on a dime. That's how we'll disrupt the industry. Adam was on board, but we both knew that raising capital wouldn't be easy. The venture capital world was saturated, and there were a million pitches floating around. But we had something they didn't: an experienced team that had been battle-tested in the corporate world, and a vision that wasn't about playing it safe. We needed investors who weren't afraid of big risks, who weren't looking for incremental growth, but for the next great leap forward. We're not asking for a handout, I said, as Adam and I discussed potential investors. We're offering them a chance to be a part of something that will change the game. After weeks of calls and meetings, we found our first big investor. They saw the potential in our vision, the idea of creating something new, something that didn't just want to play by the rules, but wanted to rewrite them. With their backing, we were off and running. We secured office space, hired a small but talented team, and started building out our product. We didn't have the luxury of wasting time. Every move we made was calculated, every decision was a step toward building something bigger than the sum of its parts. I knew this wasn't going to be easy. The first few months were filled with long hours, late nights, and constant pressure. But with every setback, I felt more certain that we were on the right track. We weren't just building a company, we were building a legacy. The day we officially launched our new company was surreal. I had spent months pouring everything I had into the vision, but now it was real. Our product was live, and the team we'd built was ready to execute. The stress of the early days had paid off. We were no longer just an idea, we were a reality. The first few weeks were a whirlwind. Clients, investors, and partners were all buzzing about our product, and the word of mouth started spreading faster than we had anticipated. Our early customers were responding positively to the way we operated, but there were also skeptics. That's always the way with anything new. But I wasn't worried. The industry had seen the same tired old companies over and over again. Huge corporate giants who made decisions based on numbers alone, without any regard for the human element. We weren't like them. Our customers could feel the difference. We were offering them transparency, flexibility, and a product that was actually tailored to their needs. As the weeks went on, it became clear that we were catching the attention of competitors. Larger companies in our space began to take notice of our growth, but they didn't know how to respond. They were used to dominating through size and scale, but we had agility and passion on our side. We were also able to attract some key talent from the very companies that had once been our competitors. When word got out that we were growing quickly and offering a different kind of work culture, talented individuals who had been stifled in the corporate world began knocking on our door. But the true test came when we hit our first major milestone: profitability. It didn't take long for us to start seeing the results of our hard work. We were meeting and exceeding our projections. Our customers were coming back, our team was growing, and investors were eager to be involved. I looked around the office on our first successful month and felt a wave of satisfaction wash over me. This wasn't just success. It was proof that the system could be different. We had disrupted the old way of doing business, and we were going to keep pushing forward. But I knew this was only the beginning. Now that we had a foothold, it was time to go after the bigger players. I was already thinking about our next move. Our competitors had no idea what was coming next. By the time we hit our 6-month mark, things had started to change in ways I never anticipated. We were no longer just a new company. We were a threat. Competitors in the industry began paying attention to us, not out of curiosity, but out of fear. Our small size was becoming a point of strength. We were nimble, we were moving faster, and we were doing it in a way that the larger companies couldn't keep up with. But as we grew, so did the stakes. I had expected pushback, but I hadn't quite prepared for how aggressive it would be. I was sitting in my office late one night when the email came through. It was from the CEO of one of the biggest players in the industry. The subject line read, "A conversation we need to have." I clicked on the message, reading through his words carefully. He wanted to meet in person to discuss our strategy. I knew exactly what that meant. He wasn't interested in partnership. He was interested in neutralizing us. I couldn't help but feel a rush of adrenaline. This wasn't the first time a corporate giant had tried to take down a challenger like us, but now it was personal. They had underestimated our ability to disrupt their business, and now they were coming for us. The meeting was set for the following week. I didn't want to go in unprepared, so I spent the next few days reviewing everything we had built, the milestones we had reached, the customers we had converted, the value we were creating. I knew we were doing things right, but now we needed to prove it to them. The day of the meeting arrived, and I walked into the sleek, glass-walled conference room of the competitor's headquarters. I was met by the CEO, along with several of his senior executives. They were polished, confident, and ready to make their pitch. They began with the usual corporate pleasantries, discussing the market and recent developments. But I wasn't here for small talk. I cut to the chase. "We're not going to be absorbed. We're not going to be a part of your corporate machine," I said, meeting the CEO's eyes. "If you want to collaborate, we can talk. But if you're here to talk about buying us out or shutting us down, I think you've misjudged us." There was a brief pause, the tension thick in the air. The CEO raised an eyebrow but didn't speak immediately. It was clear he hadn't expected such a bold response. But I wasn't done. "We're not afraid of competition. We've been playing by a different set of rules, and the truth is, we're just getting started." The room went silent for a long moment. Then the CEO leaned back in his chair, a small smirk forming on his face. "You have guts, I'll give you that. But you also have something we can't let continue: momentum. You're making waves, and we can't afford for that to disrupt our dominance. We've been here for years, John. You're just a blip." I let out a short laugh, shaking my head. "You're wrong. We're not a blip. We're the future. And you're too stuck in the past to see it." The meeting ended with no agreements, no compromises. They made it clear they weren't going to just walk away. But I knew deep down that this wasn't about who could outlast whom. It was about who could adapt, who could change the game. As I walked out of their building, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of victory. Not because we had won, this wasn't over yet, but because I knew something they didn't. The old guard had no idea how fast we were moving, how quickly we were scaling, and how many people were already behind us. We were growing from the inside out, and that was something they couldn't replicate. Over the next few months, we doubled down on our efforts. We reached new customers, attracted more talent, and further cemented our place as an industry disruptor. The larger companies made their moves to try and box us out, but we had already moved too far ahead. They were scrambling to keep up. And then came the moment that confirmed everything. The board of the company that had fired me, Greg, the same CEO who had let me go for being too aggressive, called me. They wanted to meet. I knew exactly what that meant. The email they sent read like a desperate plea for help. "We'd like to discuss a potential partnership. We've been following your growth, and we're interested in exploring ways to work together." I smiled to myself as I read the message. It was ironic. Greg and the board had tried to rid themselves of me, but now they were coming to me. They saw the success we had achieved, and they wanted a piece of it. But they were late to the game. I drafted my response. "I appreciate the offer, but the opportunity we have now is bigger than anything we could have done together. You had your chance, but we're already moving in a different direction. Best of luck." The irony wasn't lost on me. They had fired me for being too bold, too aggressive, but it was exactly that energy that had fueled this success. And now they were scrambling to follow. As I sat back in my chair, looking out over the growing company I had built from the ground up, I realized that the greatest revenge wasn't in taking down my former employer. It was in building something far greater than they could ever imagine. We weren't just changing the industry, we were creating a new one. And no one could stop us now.